The snow fell heavily, as if the sky were trying to extinguish the entire world, but it was in that white emptiness that everything began. He, the millionaire cowboy, scarred by harsh winters and a life that never gave him a break, stopped when he heard a faint sound, almost a cry for help, swallowed by the wind. And then he saw, sitting on the icy bench of the abandoned station, a nurse huddled, trembling, her purple fingers clutching an old suitcase as if it were the last thing that still bound her to life. No one else appeared. No train arrived. Only her, and the cold that seemed determined to take her last breath. But when their eyes met, something broke the icy silence. A warning, a premonition, perhaps a belated miracle. Because even before he asked her name, he already knew that woman lost in the snow carried a story that no man could ignore. And that night, which should have been just another ordinary winter, would become the story that would change their destinies forever. Before we delve into this amazing story, tell me which city and state you're watching from. Leave a comment and I'll reply with gratitude. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like this video. We want to share more stories like this. Clearwater train station was a place that time seemed to have abandoned, one of those forgotten spots on the map where only the wind knew how to come and go. That day, however, winter came early, bringing a snowstorm so thick that the world lost its horizon. The millionaire cowboy, Elias McConnell, was riding his black horse through the region, returning to the ranch after negotiating a land purchase. Money had never impressed him. It was merely the consequence of a lifetime of hard work, losses etched into his heart, and nights that seemed eternal. But that day, as the snow lashed his shoulders like icy needles, Elias noticed a detail that didn't fit with that lifeless landscape: a small, motionless figure sitting on the old station bench. At first, he thought it was just a pile of accumulated snow, until the wind blew at the right angle and revealed a thin, trembling hand gripping a suitcase handle as if its very breath depended on it. Elias felt his stomach clench. Not from fear, but from recognition. Few things in life shook him, but abandonment had always been one of them. He dismounted slowly, his steps sinking into the snow that already reached his shins, his eyes fixed on the figure that seemed about to disappear if anyone blinked too quickly. And when he got close enough, he saw the pale face, the purple lips, and the half-closed eyes of a young nurse, dressed in clothes unsuitable for the cold and hugging her own body in a futile attempt to retain heat. Amara Hayes, that was her name, though Elias would only find out later when she was warm and conscious. At that moment, however, she was just a stranger fighting against the silent death that winter brings. Elias approached cautiously, afraid to frighten her. But before he could say anything, he saw a frozen tear trickle from the corner of her eye. It wasn't recent crying. It seemed to have frozen there, a witness to hours of suffering. Elias quickly removed his gloves, even knowing the wind would burn his hands. He gently lifted her face and realized she could barely keep her eyes open. Yet when their eyes met, he saw something that didn't match her exhausted body. There was strength there, a strength that wouldn't bend, even when the whole world tried to push her to the ground. She opened her mouth to speak, but could only manage a weak sound, as if her voice were stuck deep in her throat. Elias placed his jacket over her, wrapping her tightly as if to say, "As long as I'm here, nothing will take you away." But the wind didn't stop. The snow fell heavier, and he realized he had no time to lose. He picked up the young woman in his arms, as if carrying something sacred, feeling the weight too light for someone who should be full of life. His heart raced, not from immediate romance, but from a real fear of losing her. The station seemed colder, darker, more distant from everything. Elias felt an old tightness in his chest, something that recalled memories he avoided revisiting. The death of his own sister, who also succumbed to the cold years before, when no one arrived in time to save her. He placed Amara on the horse and mounted behind her, holding her tightly, becoming a human shield between her and the storm. Each gust of wind felt like a battle, but Elias charged forward with determination. The ranch, though distant, was the only place close enough to offer immediate shelter. As they rode, Amara's head slipped back, resting against his chest without realizing it. Elias instinctively tightened his arms around her, like someone protecting something fragile that fate had delivered without warning. When they finally crossed the ranch's wooden gate, the storm was already raging like a furious beast, and his helpers rushed in when they saw Elias arrive carrying someone unconscious. The large house was filled with rapid movement. Blankets, hot water, a fireplace being lit, doors closed against the wind. Elias remained by her side the entire time. Even when the doctors arrived, even when they said she was suffering from severe hypothermia, he didn't leave. He observed every detail, her fingers slowly thawing, the involuntary tremor, her skin regaining its tone, the deep sigh she gave when she finally began to breathe more strongly. The doctor explained that if Elias had arrived 5 minutes later, he might not have brought anyone alive. And it was at that moment that he understood. It hadn't been by chance. Their paths had crossed because it had to be that way. When Amara first opened her eyes, confused, she saw a figure silhouetted against the light of the fireplace. Elias, sitting beside the bed, held a damp handkerchief he used to cool her forehead. His eyes were firm, but there was a gentleness that contrasted with his strong build, his calloused hands, the weight of someone who had spent his life working under sun and storm. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. Elias only smiled slightly, a brief, almost shy smile, and said she was safe. Her heart beat faster. Not because of immediate romance, but because of an inexplicable feeling of being exactly where she should be, even if it made no sense. And there, in the comfort of the warm house while the wind raged against the windows, two lives so distant began to intertwine. As if the cold had been merely the messenger of an encounter already written in the snows of that relentless winter. The following morning dawned slowly, grey, as if the sky was still weary from the previous night's storm. The large ranch house breathed a different kind of silence, not the usual silence of winter days, but the kind that only appears when something important is about to happen. The fireplace still burned, spreading warmth through the hallways, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled every corner. Elias, sitting at the edge of the bed where Amara rested, observed her every movement with an attention that would surprise even him, if he had time to reflect on it. There was snow piled on the porch, ice on the trees, and the entire landscape seemed painted in shades of white that stretched to infinity. But what held Elias there wasn't the snow, it was her. The nurse he had found nearly lifeless in the abandoned train station now seemed reborn before the fireplace, as if the warmth of the ranch were returning to her something that winter had tried to steal. When Amara finally opened her eyes, her first thought wasn't about where she was. It was a strange feeling of familiarity, an environment that should have seemed strange, but which, for some reason, brought her peace. She tried to stand, but her body protested with a deep pain, as if it had been bent and unfolded by the wind. Elias stepped forward and placed his hand on her shoulder, saying in a low voice that it was better to move slowly. His voice echoed softly through the room, and it was then, for the first time, that Amara realized who was there. A tall, strong man with dark, gentle eyes, who seemed to carry more stories in his gaze than years of life on his shoulders. She blinked a few times, trying to organize her thoughts. Elias spoke her name carefully, as if afraid of startling her, and explained that he had found her at the station, on the verge of succumbing to the cold. He recounted how he had brought her to the ranch, called doctors, and stayed by her side all night. Amara tried to smile in gratitude, but exhaustion still gripped her muscles. Even so, her eyes, eyes that had seen more suffering than a woman so young should, shone with genuine gratitude. Elias stood up to get water, but Amara gently held the sleeve of his shirt, asking him to stay a little longer. He sat down again, and in that instant, an invisible bridge formed between two worlds that should never have met. Her world, a nurse who worked too much, slept too little, and ran from a pain she dared not confess. His world, a millionaire cowboy, owner of immense lands, but who carried within him an emptiness that not even the mountain wind could fill. When the nurse regained enough strength to explain what she was doing there, Elias listened with rare attention. She explained that she was going to another city, her third attempt to start over in less than a year. She had left everything behind after losing someone important, someone she couldn't save in time, no matter how hard she tried. The guilt she carried was a constant weight, as if the world had placed on her shoulders the responsibility of saving everyone when she couldn't even protect herself. The train was delayed. The storm worsened. She was stuck at the station. The rest was fate, or a miracle, depending on the point of view. Elias didn't interrupt at any point. He just listened. For Amara, that was more than enough. No one had ever listened to her like that, calmly, patiently, respectfully. When the nurse finished, perhaps expecting judgment or uncomfortable silence, all the cowboy did was say that she wasn't to blame. The words were few, but full of a strength she didn't know she needed until she heard them. And in that instant, for the first time in a long time, something inside her loosened. A tight pain began to dissolve, not because it had disappeared, but because, for the first time, she was not alone. The following days were marked by healing, of both skin and spirit. Elias made a point of visiting her every day, bringing hot tea, books, blankets, childhood stories, and smiles that were rare but sincere. He introduced her to the ranch staff, who quickly treated her like family. The storm that had surrounded her upon arrival now seemed like just the prologue to something bigger, something that took shape with each passing hour. As time went on, Amara began to walk around the ranch. The horses looked at her curiously, and she looked at them carefully. The mountain wind was cold, but no longer threatening. Elias always found an excuse to keep pace with her, and she always found a reason not to stray. One night, as the low mist blanketed the fields and the stars twinkled timidly in the sky, Elias invited her to see something special. The truck followed a narrow trail until they reached a cliff where the snow seemed to sparkle like diamonds under the moonlight. It was there that Elias used to go when he needed to think, when he needed to remember, or when he needed to forget. He told her about his sister, about the pain he carried for not having been able to save her from the cold years ago, and about how meeting Amara that season had reopened old wounds, but also ignited something new within him, something good, something alive. Amara listened silently, holding her own hands to contain her emotion. When Elias finally looked at her, perhaps expecting compassion, something different happened. She took a step forward and placed her hand on his, saying nothing, but saying everything. The wind passed by them like a silent blessing, and for the first time, Elias didn't feel cold, nor did she. They stood there side by side, like two lives that fate had pushed together until they collided, not in destruction, but in reconstruction. And in the midst of that white immensity, they understood that perhaps life had finally allowed them to find each other not by chance, but because they needed to. When they returned to the ranch, the weather seemed less heavy. Amara knew she needed to continue her journey. Her train was still delayed, but now she could leave. Elias knew she could leave, but he felt something in his heart that he could no longer ignore. And on the morning she packed her bags, ready to continue her journey, Elias appeared at the door. He didn't ask her to stay, he didn't beg. He simply told her the truth he had kept to himself for days. "You came into my life like a storm, but you brought calm where I only knew emptiness. Amara smiled, a smile that carried resolve. Then, gripping the handle of her suitcase, she said, "I can go, but I don't want to go alone." Elias accompanied her to the station. The train arrived. Smoke rose, but when the doors opened, she didn't get on. She stood there looking at him like someone who finally understands where she belongs. Elias said nothing. He just opened his arms, and she walked toward him. The snow began to fall again, softly, as if winter were blessing that encounter. That day, their story not only began, it became part of the region's history, told for generations as the day the millionaire cowboy and the frozen nurse saved each other. Because it wasn't he who rescued her from the storm, nor was it she who pulled him out of his loneliness. It was fate that finally brought them together on the same path, and neither of them ever walked alone again. And if this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone you love. Click now to share it. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories we're preparing with great care for you.